Geographically, it's a very small state, with a drive from the coast to its western edge taking only around 2 hours. Yet few other parts of the country have had as much of a historical and modern impact on the United States as Massachusetts. It takes up less land than 7 different counties in the US and can fit into Alaska 63 times over, but is home to nearly 7 million people and contains the 10th largest urban area in the country, in addition to several of the most prestigious universities on Earth. Boasting a human development index higher than all but one country in the world and one of the most historically significant states in the US, Massachusetts is the 6th place I will talk about in the US Explained, a 56-part series on every state, territory, and federal district in the country, by order of admission. Hello and welcome to That Is Interesting. I'm your host Carter. This is the US Explained, Episode 6, Massachusetts. Massachusetts is located in the Köppen climate classification's humid continental region, giving it hot summers and cold winters. With 4 seasons, plenty of rain, and colder temperatures on average than the rest of the country, Massachusetts has a similar climate to many of its neighbors in the northeastern part of the US. It's nicknamed the Bay State for Massachusetts Bay, a large bay part of the larger Gulf of Maine that dominates much of the state's northern coast and that the state's urban core, the Boston metro area, is centered around. What became Massachusetts was known as the Massachusetts Bay Colony when it was under British control, and today residents of the state are officially known as Bay Staters, although demonyms such as Massachusettsans are also used. The Bay and the state both take their name from the Massachusetts, an indigenous people who lived in the area around where Boston is located today. As of when I made this video, the flag of Massachusetts consists of elements of the state seal over a white background. In addition to not being a very memorable flag, it has faced criticism over the central imagery depicted on it, that of a Native American, Wampanoag leader Massasoit, arrow facing the ground in surrender, the slicing sword of Miles Standish, a colonial leader known for the brutal slaughter of hundreds of indigenous people, just above his head. Following decades of controversy around it, Governor Charlie Baker passed a bill starting the process of creating a new state flag just around 2 months ago. Unfortunately, unlike with Mississippi, the new design proposals won't be voted on by the public, so we probably won't get an idea for what the new flag will look like until it is selected. However, there are some other local flags that could give us an idea of how it might turn out. The state's official naval ensign, for example, shows a pine tree, a common symbol of New England, on a white background. Until 1971, the state flag had a different design on the backside, the same white background and blue shield, but with the pine tree symbol on the shield instead. The pine tree is also visible on the flag of New England, an unofficial flag that is a common symbol for the region, sometimes with the addition of St. George's Cross, visible on the flag of the place the region was named after, England. Because of all this, I would guess that Massachusetts' new flag will incorporate the pine tree somewhere on its design. Whenever the new design is announced, I'll make sure to update the thumbnail of this video to include it. Another interesting thing about Massachusetts is that you'll often hear people refer to the state as Mass, especially when used after a specific town, such as saying Plymouth, Mass. I don't know if there are any other states that have something similar, but I do remember that when I lived in Pennsylvania, saying the abbreviation PA after the name of a town was much more common than I've witnessed in any other state. The two states have something else in common in that both are officially called commonwealths, a traditional term emphasizing the state as a community with responsibility for the common good. This is different from the organization of former British colonies, and in practice, commonwealths are by all means considered states, but the term is something people who live in commonwealths are pretty proud of. Other than Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, only 2 other states use that designation, Kentucky and Virginia. In terms of land area, Massachusetts is the sixth smallest state in the US, larger than only New Jersey, Hawaii, Connecticut, Delaware, and Rhode Island. It takes up just 7,800 square miles, or 20,202 square kilometers, making it slightly smaller than the countries of Belize or El Salvador. However, many of its neighboring states are similarly pretty small, so it doesn't really look out of place on a map of the region. Even though it takes up a relatively little amount of land, it is home to 6.7 million people, making it rank all the way at number 15 out of the states in terms of population, home to more people than places like Missouri, Maryland, or Colorado, states which not only take up more land, but also have pretty large populations of their own. This gives Massachusetts a population density of 871 people per square mile, or 336 per square kilometer, the third highest out of all the states in the US, surpassed only by Rhode Island and New Jersey, and the fifth if DC and Puerto Rico are included. It's located in the northeastern US, part of the region of New England, and borders 5 other states. To its north sits New Hampshire and Vermont, mostly along a straight line except for one section to the northeast, made up of a series of curves. This strange section of the border, like so many others, is due to a border dispute from Massachusetts and New Hampshire's time as British colonies. The colonial charter of Massachusetts said that the colony would sit between the Charles River to the south and the Merrimack River to the north, more specifically a spot 3 miles north of the river. However, New Hampshire claimed this spot as the mouth of the river, while Massachusetts claimed it was the headwaters. This would have given Massachusetts much of what is today New Hampshire, whereas New Hampshire believed the line should extend west from a spot 3 miles north of the Merrimack River's mouth. New Hampshire informed King George II of their competing claims, and he decided to give them even more land than they'd asked for, declaring that the border would extend not from a point north of the river's mouth or headwaters, but would follow the path of the river 3 miles to the north, all the way from its mouth to its southernmost point, located in the city of Lowell, where it would continue west in a straight line. If not for New Hampshire's 13-mile coastline, the smallest in the entire country, Massachusetts would share a border with Maine, which used to be a part of it, and sits just about 15 minutes away. But despite the two states' close proximity, Maine is the only state in New England that Massachusetts does not share a border with. To the northwest, Massachusetts' border with New Hampshire changes to a border with Vermont, with the Connecticut River, which divides the two states, cutting south through Massachusetts. To its west lies New York, separated by a diagonal border cutting northeast to southwest. New York's capital of Albany in the Hudson Valley, sitting just a few miles away. Much of its southern border is shared with Connecticut, and it's mostly a straight line, save for a few notches known as jogs, carved out of Connecticut that are part of Massachusetts, due to settlers from Massachusetts having lived in the area during a border dispute between the two. I go more in depth into the Southwick jog, the most prominent of them, in my video on Connecticut. The Connecticut-Massachusetts border ends and then dips down about a mile to the south, where it becomes the border with Rhode Island. The border extends 21 miles or 34 kilometers to the east, where it then heads south, cutting right through the suburbs of Providence before turning east and then south again, before sort of following the path of the Runnins River and then making a series of diagonal cuts, sometimes over the water, until reaching the ocean in Rhode Island Sound. This unusual border means that many parts of the Providence metro area are part of Massachusetts, that Rhode Island has a section of land completely disconnected from the rest of the state, and that Massachusetts has a small coastline on the Narragansett Bay. The state is divided into 14 counties, but like many states in New England, the counties have very little actual authority, and in most cases don't even have governments. Instead, they follow the New England town system, where lots of authority is delegated instead to individual towns. Western Massachusetts is far more mountainous than the rest of the state. A range of the Appalachian or Appalachian Mountains called the Green Mountains, which cut through most of Vermont, continue south into western Mass, where they are known as the Berkshires. Mount Greylock, the state's highest point, is located there, and the Appalachian Trail cuts through the western part of the state on its long route between Georgia and Maine. Most of the state's river systems either begin in the mountains of western Massachusetts or in neighboring states like New Hampshire and Vermont, and flow either north-south into coastal states like Connecticut and Rhode Island, or west-east into Massachusetts' own coastal areas. Several of you described Western Mass in the comments as almost a southern Vermont, mountainous, forested, and culturally perhaps more similar to its northern neighbor than to the urbanized eastern part of the Commonwealth that revolves around Boston. It contributes to Massachusetts' status as the 13th most forested state in the US, which is also helped by the fact that many of Boston's suburbs are filled with trees as well. Most residents of western Massachusetts live in one of two river valleys that cut north to south through the mountains. The valley of the Housatonic River starts not far from the border of New York in the city of Pittsfield and continues south through Connecticut. It's a thin, mostly rural valley cutting through the Berkshires, home to small towns and farms, as well as Pittsfield, an urban area home to about 60,000 people that is the 9th largest in the state, as many of Massachusetts' largest cities fall within the urban area of Boston. Pittsfield is the largest urban area in the Berkshires region of far western Massachusetts. To the north, some parts of western Mass, such as Williamstown and Adams, are part of the Hoosic Valley, a valley split between Massachusetts, Vermont, and New York, that is part of the Hudson River watershed. A little further to the east, the mountains become lower, more rolling hills, though still very rural and dominated by tree cover. Cutting through these hills is the Pioneer Valley, the wider and more populous of the two valleys that most residents of western Massachusetts live in. The valley sits around the Connecticut River, which flows south from New Hampshire and Vermont, and is the longest and arguably most important river in New England. The valley is known as the Connecticut River Valley in all the other states it cuts through, but the section located in Massachusetts is referred to as the Pioneer Valley. Parts of the valley are agricultural, but it is also pretty urbanized. The second largest urban area in Massachusetts, Springfield, is home to 621,000 people and sits along the Connecticut River in the southern part of the Pioneer Valley, less than 3 miles from Connecticut, with parts of its urban area crossing state lines. The valley is a major tourist destination, home to popular ski resorts and festivals, and contains numerous colleges and boarding high schools, most famously the Five College Consortium located around the town of Amherst, which includes Amherst College, Hampshire College, Mount Holyoke, Smith College, and UMass Amherst, the flagship location of the University of Massachusetts. On the other side of the Pioneer Valley, the low green rolling hills start up once again, this time home to a lake known as the Quabbin Reservoir, which supplies water to millions of people in the greater Boston area. As lakes go, it isn't that big, but Massachusetts is a pretty thin state, so the reservoir effectively spans about a third of its width, and its west-central location makes it a bit of a natural barrier between western and central Massachusetts. Central Massachusetts consists of the area between the sprawling Boston metropolitan area and the natural barrier of the Quabbin Reservoir. The rolling hills of western Massachusetts are still present, but become flatter as you go nearer to the ocean. Many east-flowing rivers that head into Massachusetts Bay, such as the Charles, begin here, growing wider the further they go, as well as south-flowing waterways like the Blackstone, which flows through Rhode Island, meeting the ocean in Narragansett Bay. This makes Central Mass a mix of urban and rural areas, not nearly as densely populated as the Boston area, but not far from the city either, with urban areas like Leominster, Fitchburg, and Worcester, the region's urban core in the state's third largest urban area as well as second largest city, home to 486,000 people, functioning as unique and independent cities while still sitting within the orbit of Boston. The eastern part of the Commonwealth is far flatter, sitting along Massachusetts' enormous coastline, which is the 16th longest in the US, and the 10th if small bays and inlets are excluded from the measurement. Even though it's one of the smallest states in the country by area, its widest section is the area along its coast, and the presence of 3 major bays, Massachusetts Bay, Cape Cod Bay, and Buzzards Bay, as well as peninsulas like Cape Ann and the massive and easily recognizable Cape Cod, in addition to large islands like Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, give it one of the longest coastlines in the country. Massachusetts Bay cuts over 20 miles into the state, dotted with islands and peninsulas, and downtown Boston sits where it meets the Charles River. Its location on such an excellent harbor, part of the reason it grew into the country's 10th largest urban area. Boston is the endpoint of the Northeast megalopolis, a string of overlapping urban areas stretching 400 miles to the southwest to Washington, D.C., giving it the nickname Bosswash, although it is sometimes considered to continue in both directions to Richmond, Virginia, and Portland, Maine. Early European settlement to the region, flat land, and numerous rivers and bays leading to an abundance of ports and industrial centers contributed to the Northeast megalopolis's enormous densely packed population. In addition, many states in the region, divided up early on as colonies, are much smaller than states located further to the west. Taking up a small area but home to a large population, the 7 most densely populated states in the US are all located in the Northeast megalopolis, Massachusetts included. Outside of Boston, historic towns such as Salem, Concord, and Lexington have since overlapped with the city's suburbs, although they each still maintain a very unique feel to them. Beyond the city to the north, smaller cities like Lowell, Lawrence, and Haverhill sit along the Merrimack River near New Hampshire, not far from the Granite State cities of Manchester and Nashua, and are more working-class, historically industrial cities. Along the coast on either side of the city sit what are known as the North Shore and the South Shore, a mix of wealthy suburban areas and coastal fishing villages. Massachusetts is known for its large Irish-American population in general, but the South Shore has an especially prevalent Irish population, and is sometimes known as the Irish Riviera. The South Shore town of Scituate was even determined using census data to be the most Irish town in America. The Boston metro area, its suburbs especially, are quite wealthy, surpassed in the US by only the Washington, D.C. metro area, the Bay Area, and Greater Seattle in terms of per capita income. This contributes to the state's ranking as the 4th wealthiest in the country, with only the District of Columbia as well as the states of Maryland, New Jersey, and Hawaii having a higher per capita income. Cape Cod, which is nearly 70 miles in length, is a massive peninsula jutting into the Atlantic and forming Cape Cod Bay, which much of southern Massachusetts sits on. The Cape, disconnected from the rest of Massachusetts by the man-made Cape Cod Canal, is a major vacation destination known for its beaches in the summer and is home to over 215,000 people, mostly inhabiting a sprawling collection of smaller towns located in the southern part of the peninsula. On its northern end, the city of Provincetown is a major center and vacation destination for the LGBTQ+ community, and is home to more same-sex couples than any other zip code in the country. South of the Cape, Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket are the 8th and 23rd largest islands in the contiguous US, respectively, and out of all the islands on the east coast of the US, only Long Island and Mount Desert Island in Maine are larger than Martha's Vineyard. Just like with Cape Cod, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard are tourist destinations and are dotted with summer vacation homes for wealthier New England residents. For centuries, many residents of Martha's Vineyard shared a common ancestor who was deaf, and hereditary deafness was unusually present on the island, with the island having 37 times more people born deaf per capita than the rest of the country. Because of this, the use of sign language was very common on Martha's Vineyard among everyone, including residents who were not deaf. In fact, the island even developed its own form of sign language distinct from American Sign Language, called Martha's Vineyard Sign Language, although unfortunately it is no longer in use. The final geographic region of the Commonwealth that I'll discuss is the southeastern section, basically consisting of Bristol County, which sits directly adjacent to Rhode Island. A lower income area compared to the rest of eastern Massachusetts, it has a coast on both Buzzards Bay to the south and a small inlet of Narragansett Bay to the west. It's home to several smaller cities. New Bedford, sitting on Buzzards Bay, has just under 150,000 residents in the urban area, making it the 5th largest in the state. Fall River, home to nearly 90,000 people, sits on an arm of Narragansett Bay, right up against Rhode Island, and Taunton is just a few miles inland. Much of this area is closely connected to Rhode Island, with many suburban areas of Providence located within Massachusetts, And as I mentioned earlier, parts of the country's smallest state sit geographically disconnected from the rest, as Massachusetts has a small coastline on the bay. Interestingly, Rhode Island has the highest percentage of Portuguese Americans in the country at 9.1%, with Massachusetts coming in second at 4.1%, although Massachusetts surpasses Rhode Island in terms of population. Most of these Portuguese American residents live in southeastern Massachusetts, the center of the Portuguese American community in the U.S., with Fall River and New Bedford having the most and second most Portuguese Americans in the country, and Taunton close behind in fourth place. In fact, Bristol County is the only county in the U.S. in which a plurality of residents trace their ancestry to Portugal, and the region's Portuguese influence is still visible there to this day. Massachusetts was originally home to many indigenous peoples. It was named, of course, for the Massachusetts, who lived in the eastern part of the state, stretching from the Merrimack River in the north to Buzzards Bay in the south. The Wampanoag lived south of Massachusetts Bay, inhabiting an area equivalent to what is now the entirety of the southeastern part of the state, including Cape Cod, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard, and the Nauset inhabited Cape Cod. The northeastern part of Massachusetts, including what is now the Boston area, up into southeastern New Hampshire, was home to the Pawtucket, and the Pentucket lived in the Merrimack Valley. The Nipmuc lived in what is today much of central and western Massachusetts, the Pocumtuck in the area around the Pioneer Valley, and the Mohican in the Berkshires. In addition, what is today the northern part of the state is the ancestral homeland of three peoples whose territory was mostly centered around what are today the northern New England states of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki Confederacy, a union of multiple native peoples. Most of the indigenous people of Massachusetts spoke Algonquian languages, and today numerous words in the English language, such as moose, muskrat, skunk, originate from native languages in Massachusetts. European settlers brought to North and South America deadly diseases like smallpox, which decimated indigenous populations, and many more were victims of genocide, brutally murdered by colonial forces and pushed west. All in all, millions of Native Americans were killed due to European colonial expansion. The Pocumtuck, Pennacook, and Nauset tribes no longer exist, but surviving members often joined other Native American tribes, where today some members have Pocumtuck, Pennacook, or Nauset ancestry. Most of the Mohicans were forced west, and today mostly live in Wisconsin. Today, most members of the Abenaki, Massachusetts, Wabanaki Confederacy, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc still reside in Massachusetts or surrounding New England states, though in Massachusetts only two tribes have federal recognition, both of which are Wampanoag. The first colonists to arrive in Massachusetts came from Britain, and it became one of the earliest British colonies on the continent. In New England, only the Popham colony on the coast of Maine was founded earlier, and it lasted only a little over a year. In what would become the United States, only one permanent colony was founded before Massachusetts, Virginia, originally centered around the settlement of Jamestown. The first British colonists in what is now Massachusetts were members of a branch of Christianity called the Separatists, better known as Pilgrims, who had split off from the Calvinist or Puritan branch of the church and fled persecution in England for the Dutch city of Leiden. However, the Pilgrims were worried that their faith community would collapse in the Netherlands, and in 1620 left Leiden, where they boarded a ship called the Mayflower in the British port city of Plymouth. On board, they wrote an agreement called the Mayflower Compact, that is considered one of the first constitutions and went on to influence the founding documents of the United States. They landed on the shore of Cape Cod Bay on the coast of what is now southeastern Massachusetts, near the famous Plymouth Rock, where they founded a colony named Plymouth for the city they left from. The branch of Christianity that the Pilgrims had split off from were a stricter and more religiously intolerant denomination called the Puritans. 8 years after the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, the Puritans followed suit, settling to the north along Massachusetts Bay, where they founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony, along with the cities of Boston and Salem. Massachusetts Bay was dominated by Puritan leaders like John Winthrop and members of the Mather family, and after its merging with the Plymouth colony was the site of the infamous Salem witch trials, which saw the brutal execution of dozens of people, mostly women, who were accused of being witches, a clearly absurd accusation. To the south, Plymouth was home to another famous event in colonial history, the First Thanksgiving, a meal that went on to inspire the annual tradition of Thanksgiving dinner in the United States and several other countries. The well-known story of the First Thanksgiving, however, is often portrayed in an inaccurate light that leaves out the harsher truths of the relationship between Native people and European colonists in Massachusetts. It is often depicted as a moment of peace and alliance between the Pilgrims of Plymouth and the Wampanoags whose land they had taken. But in addition to the devastation the Wampanoags faced at the hands of diseases the Pilgrims carried from overseas, colonists from Plymouth and numerous neighboring New England colonies did not keep up their end of the alliance for very long, provoking the brutal King Philip's War, in which they decimated the Wampanoag people and their allies, killing thousands and seizing control of Wampanoag land. Out of the two colonies, Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay, the latter grew more successful, spreading further inland, establishing a stronger agricultural industry in the Pioneer Valley, and receiving far greater numbers of settlers, even jockeying and eventually establishing control over Maine, the two connected by a disputed territory between Massachusetts and New Hampshire that would eventually wind up in New Hampshire's control, cutting Massachusetts in two. After a brief and unpopular stint in which numerous British colonies were jointly governed as the Dominion of New England, by 1691, Britain merged the Massachusetts Bay Colony together with the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, as well as the colony of Plymouth, joining the two into the province of Massachusetts Bay. Massachusetts Bay was one of the most important of the 13 colonies, ranking consistently among the top 3 most populous of the colonies. In the mid-1700s, Boston was the largest city in the colonies, surpassed only by Philadelphia. An important port city, it was the heart of the American Revolution, with events such as the Boston Tea Party and Boston Massacre causing citizens of Massachusetts, including John and Samuel Adams, Elbridge Gerry, and John Hancock, to lead the push for independence. In fact, the first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired in Concord, a town that today sits just outside of Boston, during the battles of Lexington and Concord, in which Britain attempted to seize a stockpile of weapons held by the colonists, beginning the conflict that eventually led to the founding of the United States. Boston continued to play an essential role in the war. A hotbed of revolution, British troops had occupied the city, infuriating the colonists, and George Washington's troops successfully conducted a year-long siege of the city that included the famed Battle of Bunker Hill. Massachusetts ratified the Constitution and joined the United States on February 6, 1788, making it the 6th state in the Union. Following a nearly 2-century history of slavery, it became the center of the abolitionist movement in the United States, with black people throughout Massachusetts standing up for their freedom, which resulted in the successful abolition of slavery in the state in 1783, earlier than any other state other than Vermont, which was not yet a part of the U.S. and only enacted a partial ban on the horrible institution. Boston publisher William Lloyd Garrison became one of the abolitionist movement's most prominent voices, publishing a newspaper known as the Liberator out of the city for decades leading up to the Civil War. Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and John Brown all lived in Massachusetts for a time, as did women's rights leader Susan B. Anthony. A major event in the lead-up to the conflict was the Missouri Compromise, which saw the severing of the northern section of Massachusetts, an area that had taken up over 3/4 of the state's land area, but contained a far smaller population. It had been geographically disconnected from the rest of the state by New Hampshire, and had pushed for its own statehood for much of its history, eventually forming the new state of Maine, a short-term compromise to balance the number of slave-holding and free states in the country that only pushed off the impending conflict and extended the awful institution of slavery. After the war, Massachusetts became the center of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, which led to increased growth in cities like Boston, Springfield, and Worcester. Lowell in the Merrimack Valley was a major center of the textile industry, becoming home to many factories and mills along the river. The state was the heart of the Transcendentalist movement. And author Henry David Thoreau wrote his famed book Walden while living on Walden Pond in Concord. In recent years, Massachusetts has become the most developed state in the U.S. and has the highest human development index in the country. Today, many people regard Massachusetts as having the best public school system in the U.S., in addition to the presence of Harvard University, widely considered one of the best, if not the best, college in the country and possibly the world. The state is home to other prestigious educational institutions such as the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, along with far too many other colleges to name. In fact, Massachusetts has the most college students per capita out of any state in the U.S., and Boston has the most colleges per capita of any major city. Boston is an incredible city. It is old and historic, and you can feel it. Modern skyscrapers, the tallest in New England, jut up against centuries of architecture, old brick buildings and passageways, and cemeteries where the country's founders are buried. The city's horrible traffic and near impossibility to navigate comes from the fact that its streets grew naturally, built for a small town where people walk to get around, not the core of a 4 million person urban area. The T is the country's first subway system, the Boston Common its first ever park. The state's capital is home to an old brick building with a gold-plated dome. It's home to a distinctive accent, popular food chains like Dunkin' Donuts, as well as a strong New England seafood scene. Other parts of the Boston metro area, such as Cambridge, home to Harvard, feel not like suburbs but cities and towns in their own right, due to their long existence, and often sit very close to the city. A park called the Rose Kennedy Greenway sits on the site of the Big Dig, a massive infrastructure project that saw the lowering of a highway into a tunnel underneath the city. The city and the state are the core of the Irish American population in the country, with many Irish immigrants moving to Boston in the 1800s. This picture right here is the world's largest Irish flag, located in Boston. Nearly half of the residents of Holyoke, Massachusetts are Puerto Rican, the highest population per capita in the entire U.S. outside of Puerto Rico itself. Immigrant groups from Italy, Portugal, Cambodia, China, Poland, Greece, and the Dominican Republic, to name just a few, have all called Massachusetts home. In terms of religion, Massachusetts is the second most Catholic state in the U.S., after neighboring Rhode Island, with 34% of its residents identifying as Catholic, largely due to its status as a destination for Irish immigrants. It is also the third most Jewish state in the country, after just New Jersey and New York, with 4.25% of its population practicing Judaism. However, Pew has also ranked it the least religious state in the country. This doesn't necessarily mean that residents of the state do not identify as members of a specific religion, but that religion plays less of a major role in their day-to-day lives. After the 1917 Halifax explosion that killed well over 1,000 people, Boston, one of the largest nearby cities, provided much-needed aid to the city. Since around a half-century ago, Nova Scotia has sent Boston an enormous Christmas tree as a gesture of thanks. James Naismith invented the game of basketball in Springfield, and today the city is home to the Basketball Hall of Fame. Home to New England's largest city, as well as 46% of the region's population, every New England Major League sports team in the NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL are all located in Massachusetts, with teams like the Celtics, not Celtics, Bruins, Patriots, and Red Sox boasting popularity across much of New England. The state has had an incredibly outsized impact on U.S. politics. The second president and first vice president, John Adams, was born in Quincy, the only of the founding father presidents not from Virginia, and his son, John Quincy Adams, also from Massachusetts, became president as well, representing the state in the Senate before his presidency and in the House of Representatives after. Calvin Coolidge, though born in Vermont, served as the state's governor prior to his vice presidency and then presidency. John F. Kennedy came from a powerful Irish-American family from Brookline and represented Massachusetts in both the House and Senate before becoming president. His brother Robert was a major political figure himself, and another brother, Ted, served as senator from Massachusetts for nearly 47 years. In addition, Bobby Kennedy's grandson, Joe, represented Massachusetts in the House before losing a recent bid for the Senate. George H.W. Bush, though spending most of his life in Connecticut, Texas, or Maine, was actually born in Massachusetts, in the town of Milton. In addition to presidents, in recent decades, numerous unsuccessful nominees for the White House came from Massachusetts. Michael Dukakis, who lost to George H.W. Bush in 1988, was the state's governor during a time of economic growth, dubbed the Massachusetts Miracle. John Kerry, who lost to George W. Bush in 2004, but went on to become Secretary of State under Barack Obama and today serves in the Biden administration as climate envoy, represented the state in the Senate. Finally, Mitt Romney, who lost to Obama in 2012 but now represents Utah in the Senate, was Massachusetts' governor. Politically, Massachusetts is one of the most progressive states in the US and has a Cook PVI of D+12, which means it typically votes for the Democratic Party by a margin 12% higher than the rest of the country on average. That's a Democratic lean on par with Maryland and California, and surpassed by only Vermont and Hawaii. And it was the only state in the country to vote for George McGovern, who lost in a landslide against Nixon. It was the first state to legalize gay marriage, and its two senators, Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey, along with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, are well-known leaders of the party's progressive wing. Interestingly, Massachusetts has a long history of electing Republican governors. In fact, out of the last 6 of the state's governors, only one has been a Democrat. Though Republican, in order to win in Massachusetts, these governors are usually very moderate, if not liberal. Charlie Baker, the current governor, is a Republican, and though leading one of the most Democratic-leaning states in the country, is one, if not the most popular governor in the US, and is even more popular among Democrats than Republicans. That is it for Massachusetts. Before I wrap up, I have some exciting news. As of right now, I'm officially launching the TII store, where you'll be able to purchase all sorts of official That Is Interesting products and merchandise, including shirts, hoodies, embroidered beanies, masks, mugs, embroidered backpacks made by Champion, laptop stickers and sleeves, and so on. We even have a customer service email in case you encounter any difficulties. One of the products that I'm most excited to announce are these limited edition framed state prints that commemorate each video in the US Explained. These will be available as soon as the corresponding US Explained video is uploaded, but only 10 of each will be released, so make sure to buy one before they go out of stock. Right now, you'll be able to buy a Massachusetts state print, but because these are brand new, I will also include prints for the 5 states I've made videos on already, so please click the link in the description and go pay a visit to the TII store. Also, please subscribe to my brother's channel, Quinn the Cameraman. He made the great intro at the beginning of this video that I'll use in all the US Explained videos. Also, go follow me on Instagram at ThatIsInterestingYT. Hopefully, I'll be posting some more stuff there in the future. I tried to be pretty thorough with this video, but I know there were definitely things I missed, as there was a lot to talk about. I want to give a big thank you to everyone from Massachusetts who helped give me information for this video, leaving detailed and informative comments on YouTube, as well as Discord. I truly would not have been able to make this video without all your help. My next video in the series will be on Maryland, and I'll need all the help I can get. If you're from Maryland, please respond to my community post or my comment here, or leave something in the Discord server to let me know what you'd like to see included about your home state. I especially want to thank everyone who has already joined my Patreon. Through my Patreon, you can access different things such as behind the scenes videos, an exclusive Discord Q&A with me, ad-free content, and shoutouts in my videos, which are included right here. I also really appreciate the well over 250 of you who have already joined my Discord server. If you haven't joined the Discord server yet, it's a great place to continue conversations about the topics discussed in these videos, interact with fellow viewers, and help provide information about upcoming states in the series. I'll put links to both the Patreon and the Discord, as well as the TII store, in the comments. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you learned something new. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover the countries, cities, people, and places of the world and beyond. These videos will leave you saying, "That is interesting."